We have a homicide scene with one adult male, one adult female, and one juvenile male. Our main concern right now are the two children we cannot find.
Address my children's abductors or abductor. Please, please release my children safely.
Investigators say there are still no solid leads in the case.
It is back to square one in the search for two Idaho children missing since Monday.
Police are following up hundreds of tips in their search for Shasta and Dylan Groene.
Count one, the defendant Joseph Edward Duncan III.
How do you want to die? Do you want to be shot like your brother? Or do you want me to strangle you? That was the choice an 8-year-old girl was given by a serial killer in the middle of a remote forest. She had just watched him execute her 9-year-old brother. Her mother, her stepdad, and her older brother were already dead. She was completely alone. I gotta be honest with you, most adults would have given up right then and there. But Shasta Groene didn't. Instead of begging, she made a choice that kept her alive just long enough to orchestrate an escape so impossible, it feels like it belongs in a movie. The chilling reality finally came to light, not when police found her, but when the world realized she was the one who lured the killer into the light. Does this seem real to you guys? I gotta be honest with you. Before we descend into the absolute darkness of this case, before we walk through those blood-stained hallways and into the chilling depths of the Montana wilderness, I want you to know the ending. Because when you hear what this little girl endured, you are going to need a shred of hope to hold on to. So, let's start with the monster, Joseph Edward Duncan III, the sadistic predator who orchestrated this unimaginable nightmare. The literal boogeyman who hunted innocent children for sport is dead. He didn't get a quick, easy exit. On March 28, 2021, he took his final miserable breath inside a cold federal prison cell. He died a slow, agonizing death from terminal brain cancer, his body rotting away while he sat on death row. He died locked in a cage, completely stripped of the power and control he so desperately craved. The evil he brought into this world was finally extinguished. But the little girl he tried to completely break, the one he dragged through the absolute depths of hell, she survived. And her story of resilience is honestly something out of a movie. Today, Shasta Groene McLean is a grown woman. She is a fiercely protective single mother, raising 5 young boys of her own. But life hasn't just been a fairy tale since her rescue. The universe kept throwing horrifying curveballs her way. Just recently, in early 2024, a devastating fire ripped through her family's home. The inferno reduced everything she had worked so hard to build to pure ashes, pushing her and her kids into sudden homelessness. I mean, think about that. How much can one human being take? Most people would have just shattered. They would have completely given up. Not Shasta. She stood right back up. With the help of a community that never forgot her, she rebuilt her life yet again. And then, in August 2025, marking the exact 20th anniversary of her miraculous escape from the woods, she did something so incredibly brave it gives me goosebumps. She released her raw, unfiltered memoir titled Out of the Woods. She didn't hide away. She marched right back into Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, the very town where her family was slaughtered to hold a book signing.
Do you remember that feeling of I'm safe? I do remember that feeling of I'm safe, but at the same time it was just, I think I was so focused, well, sad about my family, but so focused on, where are my oldest brothers or where's my dad and, just stuff like that.
She faced the ghosts of her past, looking her hometown in the eye, not as a broken victim, but as the ultimate survivor. She proved that while trauma becomes a permanent layer of your skin, it doesn't have to dictate your future. What struck me the most was trying to wrap my mind around how this is even possible. How does a tiny, terrified 8-year-old child outsmart a seasoned serial killer? How does she survive weeks of unspeakable tragedy and manipulation, just to live to write a book about it? To understand the absolute genius of her survival, we have to rewind the clock. Let's go back to the gloomy, rain-soaked morning of May 16, 2005. It's the early morning hours of May 16, 2005. We are in Wolf Lodge, a deeply rural, heavily wooded area just outside of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. It's a typical, gloomy day in the Pacific Northwest, the kind of relentless, steady rain that washes out the dirt roads and makes the surrounding forests feel entirely isolated. A local man who owned the property and rented the house to 40-year-old Brenda Groene and her 37-year-old boyfriend Mark Mackenzie decides to walk over to the residence. It's a completely mundane errand. He's just heading over to hand the kids some allowance money for doing yard work. But as he makes his way up the dirt driveway and approaches the front step, he stops dead in his tracks. The house is eerily silent, save for the frantic, panicked barking of dogs trapped inside. And right there, smeared aggressively across the front door and pooling into the rainwater on the porch, is blood. He immediately backs away, his hands shaking as he dials 911. When the dispatcher picks up, you can hear the absolute terror in his voice. "I went to the door to pay the little kids $10, and there's blood all over the door. Nobody comes through the door." Kootenai County deputies race to the Wolf Lodge home, sirens piercing through the heavy rain. When they arrive, they spot more crimson droplets mixed with grass clippings leading to a back door that has been left slightly ajar. With their weapons drawn, they step inside, and what they find is a scene so brutal, so horrifically violent, that seasoned investigators would later admit it gave them nightmares for years. The metallic smell of blood hangs heavy in the air. On the kitchen floor lies 13-year-old Slade. He's face down, his hands bound tightly behind his back, and his head is wrapped entirely in duct tape. Moving deeper into the living space, past a shattered glass coffee table, officers find the bodies of Brenda and Mark. I gotta be honest with you, the level of overkill here is just sickening. All three victims had been savagely bludgeoned to death. The murder weapon was later identified as a framing hammer, which left distinct, cross-hatched circular patterns deeply embedded into their skulls. They were struck so many times that police couldn't even recognize Brenda's face. They had to identify her by her tattoos. And what made it even more chilling, Mark's wrists and ankles were bound using heavy-duty, police-grade zip ties. This wasn't a frantic struggle. This was methodical. It was a calculated execution. But as the police clear the upstairs loft and the back bedrooms, a sudden, paralyzing wave of dread washes over the entire team. There were 5 people living in this house. 3 are lying dead on the floor. Where are the other 2? Brenda's 2 youngest children, 8-year-old Shasta and 9-year-old Dylan, are completely gone. They have vanished without a single trace. What do you guys think goes through an officer's mind in that exact moment, realizing that whoever is capable of this absolute bloodbath is currently out there, driving away with 2 terrified little kids? As investigators look around the blood-soaked house, they notice something deeply unsettling. The electronics are untouched. Valuables are still sitting in plain sight. The horrifying truth is, this wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was a hunt. A predator had come out of the woods specifically for those children, and he was willing to slaughter anyone who stood in his way. While an Amber Alert flashes across every highway sign and television screen in America, investigators are desperately trying to figure out who could have done this. At first, they suspect a family member, or maybe a local with a grudge. Little did they know the man driving away with Dylan and Shasta was a complete stranger. He was a phantom who had slipped into their lives without them ever noticing. His name was Joseph Edward Duncan III. He wasn't a random burglar. He was a highly calculated, deeply psychotic serial killer and a level 3 offender who had been committing unspeakable crimes since he was just 15 years old. In 2005, he was actually a fugitive, having skipped out on a $15,000 bail in Minnesota for abusing a young boy. Duncan was a drifter, crisscrossing the country in a stolen red Jeep, hunting for his next prey.
It appears Joseph Duncan was on the prowl for victims for several weeks before he brutally attacked Brenda and Slade Groene and Mark Mackenzie. Duncan used a GPS system to mark points of interest as he traveled from his home in Fargo, North Dakota, through Missouri, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, and into Spokane.
And his methods were terrifyingly precise. He didn't just stumble upon the Wolf Lodge home. He later confessed to police that he had been driving around, specifically using GPS to mark houses where children lived. He spotted 8-year-old Shasta and 9-year-old Dylan playing in their front yard in their swimsuits. From that exact second, he locked onto them. For days, Duncan surveilled the property. He parked in the distance, waiting for the sun to go down. He used night vision goggles to watch the family through their windows, learning their routines, figuring out exactly where the children slept. He even went so far as to secretly bring treats to the family's pit bull, slowly befriending the dog so it wouldn't bark when he finally made his move. He bought oversized shoes to throw off footprints and prepared a backpack full of duct tape, a sawed-off shotgun, and interlocking police zip ties. He was orchestrating the perfect crime. Then came the early morning of May 16th. At around 6 a.m., Duncan crept through the tall grass and slipped through the slightly open back door. Wearing all black, a mask, and a hat, he leveled his shotgun at Brenda, who was sleeping on the couch. He forced her to wake up Mark and the children. Imagine the absolute terror of being ripped from your sleep, forced onto your living room floor, and tied up by a towering man with a gun. Duncan bound the adults and the 13-year-old Slade. Then, he grabbed Dylan and Shasta, carried them out into the freezing backyard, laid them on the grass, and told them if they made a single sound, they would die. Leaving the two small children outside in the dark, Duncan walked back into the house. And he didn't bring his gun. He went to his backpack by the fence line and pulled out a framing hammer. What happened next was a bloodbath. He brutally beat Slade, Mark, and Brenda until they were completely unrecognizable. This really hit me different when I heard it. During his interrogation, when detectives asked Duncan why he didn't just kidnap the kids and leave the parents tied up, he gave an answer that made my blood run cold. He stared dead into the camera and called the bludgeoning of a mother or an act of compassion. He claimed he killed Brenda because it was more merciful than letting her live with the agonizing pain of losing her children. Does this seem weird to you guys? Because to me it is the absolute peak of a warped, psychotic mind. Who on earth rationalizes completely obliterating a family as an act of mercy? The level of delusion is just staggering. And the nightmare for Dylan and Shasta was only just beginning. After the unimaginable massacre at Wolf Lodge, Joseph Duncan loaded 8-year-old Shasta and 9-year-old Dylan into his stolen red Jeep. He drove them through the dark, winding mountain roads, crossing state lines nearly 100 miles away into the deep, isolated wilderness of the Lolo National Forest in Montana. For 7 excruciating weeks, these two terrified children were held completely hostage at remote campsites. The isolation was absolute. There was no one to hear them scream. Whenever Duncan had to leave the campsite to get supplies or scout the area, he would chain the children to trees like animals. I gotta be honest with you. The physical torment they endured was horrific, but the psychological torture Duncan inflicted was on another level of evil. He played sick, twisted games with their minds.
He grabbed a hammer. He said, "See this hammer? This is the hammer that I murdered your mom and your stepdad and your brother with." And he was like, "They're not alive and you're never going to see them again."
Then, he would immediately pivot to giving them false hope. He forced Shasta and Dylan to sit down in the dirt and write letters to their biological father, Steve Groene. He made them write things like, "Dear Dad, I miss you very much. We might see you guys again." He manipulated them into believing that if they just behaved, if they just followed his sickening rules, they would eventually go home. But those letters were never mailed. They were just another cruel tool to break their spirits. As the weeks dragged on, Duncan's violent rage became increasingly focused on 9-year-old Dylan. Dylan was a brave older brother. He tried to protect Shasta, comforting her when she cried. Duncan despised that bond. He would take Dylan away to an abandoned cabin for hours, returning with the boy severely bruised and beaten. Then came a day that shattered any remaining shred of hope. Duncan, playing the role of a benevolent captor, presented the children with a challenge. A small squirrel had been darting around the campsite for days. Duncan told Dylan that if he could catch the squirrel, he would pack up the Jeep and finally take them home. It was an impossible task, a sick joke designed to mock a desperate child. But Dylan, driven by the absolute need to save his little sister, pushed himself to the limit. Miraculously, against all odds, he caught the squirrel. The kids were ecstatic. They thought they had finally won. Shasta ran to her brother, throwing her arms around him, holding his hand, believing with all her 8-year-old heart that the nightmare was over. But as they stood there hugging, a deafening beang echoed through the trees. Shasta felt her brother's hand suddenly slip from hers. Duncan had pulled out his sawed-off shotgun and fired a blast directly into 9-year-old Dylan's stomach at point-blank range. As Dylan fell to the ground, screaming in agony and begging, "No, please don't," Duncan callously walked up, racked the shotgun, and fired a second round, killing the boy instantly. Shasta couldn't scream. She couldn't move. She was completely frozen in a state of absolute shock. But Duncan wasn't finished. He forced the traumatized 8-year-old girl to help him drag her brother's lifeless, bleeding body onto a plastic tarp. He then threw Dylan's remains into a roaring campfire to burn the evidence, forcing Shasta to watch her protector turn to ash. Little did they know, the darkest chapter of Shasta's nightmare was only just beginning. Because now, the 8-year-old girl was completely alone with the monster. Now completely alone, 8-year-old Shasta was trapped in a living nightmare. With the massive nationwide manhunt intensifying and helicopters sweeping the forests, Duncan moved her to a new, lower campsite on the mountain. Because they were now dangerously close to civilization, he decided she was too much of a liability. It was time to tie up loose ends.
But just like you have the choice to be strangled or you have the choice to be shot like your brother, and that one's going to be quicker. I felt like if I had chose the strangulation, that I might have a chance to talk him out of what he was doing.
He looked down at the terrified little girl and gave her an unimaginably sick ultimatum. How do you want to die? He offered her a choice. She could be shot, which he promised would be quick and painless just like her brother, or she could be strangled. I gotta be honest with you, if I were in that situation, the sheer panic would completely paralyze me. But Shasta's survival instincts were operating on a level that absolutely defies logic. Her 8-year-old brain quickly calculated the odds. A gunshot is instant, it's final. But strangulation takes time. And time meant she might have a tiny window to talk him out of it. She chose the rope. Duncan laid her on the dirt ground, wrapped a heavy rope tightly around her neck, and began to pull. Shasta later described her vision fading, the world turning completely white as the oxygen was cut off from her brain. She was slipping away, but she had been paying incredibly close attention to her captor over the last several weeks.
I had worked up enough breath to say, "Please don't, Jet."
She knew he had a bizarre, emotional attachment to a nickname from his past, Jet. Gathering the absolute last ounce of breath in her burning lungs, she managed to gasp out 3 words, "Please don't, Jet."
I noticed that when I would use that name with him, it would like soften a little bit, like it would soften him. And he's like, "What did you say?" He started crying and he was like, "I can't do this."
The psychological effect was instantaneous. Hearing that specific, affectionate nickname from the child he was actively murdering completely short-circuited his twisted brain. Duncan stopped pulling. He dropped the rope, broke down crying, and sobbed, "I can't do this." That was the exact moment the power dynamic shifted. Shasta realized that to survive, she couldn't just act like a terrified victim, she had to become a master manipulator. She started playing a role to absolute perfection.
Anytime me going home was brought up, I would tell him, "No, I don't want to go. I want to stay here with you." And he'd be like, "Really?" You could tell that it was starting to catch him off guard a little bit.
When Duncan tried to force pills and alcohol on her, she faked it pretending to drink while staying completely sober as he rambled and confessed to his past murders. She began faking an emotional bond. She asked him about his life and his family. She even asked, "Can I meet your mom someday?" When Duncan, desperate for some sick sense of connection, asked if she would just stay with him and be his daughter, she looked the monster right in the eye and said yes. She told him she didn't want to go home.
He basically sat me down and asked if I would be his kid and I would stay with him, that I would call him Dad.
He's like, "I want to take you to meet my mom. Would you meet her?" And I had said yes.
Then she carefully planted the ultimate seed. She told him, "I want to show you where I grew up, I want to show you my school, and I want to show you where my best friend lives." She was actively convincing a serial killer to drive her out of the remote wilderness and right back into a populated city.
I said, "Can you take me to where I grew up? Like, I want to show you where I went to school."
school, and I want to show you where my best friend lives. Like, I want to show you all these places that are important to me because you're important to me. And he was like, yeah, of course, I would love to.
Am I the only one who finds this absolutely mind-blowing? An 8-year-old child, traumatized, grieving, and completely terrorized, flawlessly reverse, manipulated a hardened, seasoned serial killer. She didn't just survive the woods, she was actively paving her own road to freedom. It's July 2, 2005, 2 a.m. The unthinkable happens. Joseph Duncan, utterly convinced by an 8-year-old's brilliant psychological performance, actually drives his stolen red Jeep out of the Montana wilderness and straight back into Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. He drives right past Shasta's elementary school and her best friend's house, just like she had asked. Shasta is sitting in the passenger seat, absolutely terrified but holding her breath, praying someone will see her. Duncan, feeling completely invincible and entirely in control, decides they should stop for a late-night meal at a local Denny's. They walk right through the front doors, literally stepping right past a missing poster plastered with Shasta's face on it.
I remember just holding on to hope, but still feeling like there wasn't going to be any.
They sit down at a booth. A waitress named Amber Dean walks over to take their order. She takes one look at the towering, dead-eyed man and the quiet little girl in the blue shirt, and her heart immediately drops into her stomach. She knows exactly who this child is. Keeping her composure so she doesn't spook the killer, Amber steps away and discreetly alerts her manager, Linda. Knowing the stakes are literally life or death, Linda sneaks into the back office, locks the door, and makes the call that will change everything.
As I was walking in, I noticed that my missing persons poster was right there. There was this guy standing outside, and he was with his friends, and he nodded his head and I nodded my head, and he went up to the counter and made it kind of seem like he was conversating with one of the waitresses, and then I seen her look over at me.
They were my only table at the time, and I immediately recognized her. His entire world revolved around her. She didn't speak without his permission. There was something just not okay.
Out in the dining room, the tension is absolutely suffocating. Word silently spreads, and the entire restaurant slowly realizes what is happening. Customers subtly shift their positions to block the doors. But Duncan is getting restless. He's ready to leave and take Shasta back into the dark.
I remember thinking that he's so smart, and I was like, even if they know that I'm with him, maybe he will have an excuse and they'll just leave and they won't think that anything was wrong.
Thinking on her feet, Amber uses a brilliant stalling tactic. She pretends the receipt printer is malfunctioning, apologizing for the delay to keep Duncan trapped in his seat for just a few more agonizing minutes. Suddenly, police cruisers swarm the parking lot. Officers burst through the Denny's doors and march straight up to table 20. An officer looks down at the little girl and asks for her name. Shasta, playing her survival role flawlessly to the very last second, doesn't answer the cop right away. She looks across the table at the monster who slaughtered her entire family, silently asking for his permission. Duncan, finally realizing he is entirely cornered and his twisted fantasy is over, gives her a slight, defeated nod. "I'm Shasta," she says. In a flash, officers swarm Joseph Duncan, ripping him out of the booth and slapping the cuffs on him. The nightmare in the woods is finally over, and then everything changed when the FBI secured Duncan's stolen Jeep parked outside. Inside, they didn't just find zip ties and weapons. They found a digital camera. And on that camera were the horrifying, unspeakable videos Duncan had recorded of himself torturing little Dylan. It was the ultimate, irrefutable proof of his absolute evil, the exact piece of evidence that would become his one-way ticket to death row. I gotta be honest with you. Walking out of those woods didn't mean the nightmare was instantly over. You don't just survive a monster like Joseph Duncan, witness the brutal execution of your entire family, and wake up the next day perfectly fine. The physical rescue at that Denny's was truly just the first step in a lifelong, grueling battle for her own mind. As Shasta grew older, the crushing weight of survivor's guilt, severe PTSD, and the glaring media spotlight became absolute torture. By the time she was just 14 years old, she was desperately spiraling. She turned to heavy stimulant, alcohol, Anything she could get her hands on just to numb the agonizing memories of her mother's screams and her brother Dylan's final breath. She was trying to escape a pain that most of us couldn't even fathom. She laid all of this bare, completely unfiltered, in her recent 2025 memoir, Out of the Woods. She didn't sugarcoat her descent into the shadows. But here is the truly beautiful part. She didn't let the darkness win. After ending up in a juvenile correctional facility, she found the strength to rebuild herself. She clawed her way out of the abyss, got sober, and ultimately became a fiercely loving mother to 5 boys. She broke the cycle. If there is one profound insight to take away from Shasta's incredible life, it's that trauma never truly disappears. Society loves a clean, perfect healing story, but the reality is much heavier. Trauma doesn't just magically fade away, it becomes a permanent layer of your skin. It changes how you breathe, how you trust, and how you see the world. Shasta's journey proves that the greatest courage isn't pretending that you are fully healed, or that your life is picture perfect. The absolute highest form of bravery is simply accepting that it is perfectly okay to not be okay. It's waking up every single day, carrying an unimaginably heavy weight on your shoulders, and actively choosing to step forward anyway. Joseph Duncan tried to completely obliterate her existence, but she outsmarted him, she outlived him, and ultimately, she outshined his evil. What do you guys think? When you strip away all the details, when she was sitting completely alone in the freezing dirt of the Montana wilderness, having lost absolutely everything she ever loved, what do you think was the biggest factor that kept an 8-year-old girl from just giving up in those woods? Let me know your thoughts down below. I gotta be honest, I'll keep you posted if I find anything new. Thanks so much for watching and for all your comments, appreciate you guys.